Hello, and welcome to the 26th episode of Recluse Horror. This is a daily horror movie review podcast. So just a little background on the project. Back 293 days ago on my birthday, I decided I wanted to watch and review a horror movie every single day. I have done so, as I said, for the last 293 days, although only the last 26 have been podcasts. So each episode, I talk about one film that I have just right then seen, usually within 5 minutes of watching it. And I review another that was one that I reviewed in text previously and just go over any impressions I have left, aided, of course, by the text review. So I'm by myself today. I ended up having to spend like 5 hours longer than I thought I was going to on work. That's no exaggeration. And so it didn't leave me a whole lot of time for anything. Today is Foreign Friday, in which case I would usually be watching a foreign film, which I did, but I had to find a foreign short horror film because by the time I got done, it was about, 15 minutes to midnight, and I had to watch something before midnight. So I could have just decided to count it as long as I started like before midnight and watched a whole movie, but I also have tomorrow, there's this thing that I've been like anticipating for months now, that I'm going to tomorrow, and I have a lot of preparation to do for this particular event. So I'm really excited, and I just want to leave myself some time. And I still have to watch a movie tomorrow, but good news is you'll probably get the review for tomorrow early, just because I am doing a thing at night. So hopefully I'll have it done before I leave. If not, well, you know. Anyway, so the movie that I watched today was The Room. Now, before you jump on that, I'm not talking about The Room, obviously. The Tommy Wiseau film, this is called The Room. It's from 2014. It's a Japanese production. And it seems like YouTube had some direct involvement in it. It said that it was filmed at YouTube Space Japan or something. And it also said that Guillermo del Toro had some sort of involvement with it. For those of you, trapped under a rock, Guillermo del Toro, he did, he's done a ton of stuff, but he did Pan's Labyrinth and The Shape of Water, which was just up for like 4 awards. And then Pacific Rim is the one that a lot of people know, which is funny because it doesn't really feel like a Guillermo del Toro film, but whatever. He also produced, I think, El Orfanato, I think is what it's called, The Orphanage, which was pretty good. I reviewed that previously. But anyway, Guillermo del Toro apparently advised the people making this movie, so that's kind of interesting. So this one was kind of good. I actually, by the first, it's like a 5.5 minute movie, and by the first, minute or two, I felt like, oh no, this isn't going to be good. But honestly, by the time they got to the end, they really brought it around. There's not really much to tell as far as a synopsis is concerned. Basically, some people are going into some weird, creepy house to check it out. It doesn't appear to be that there's anything else, and, they walk into a horror movie scene, so obviously a horror movie takes place. The acting is not the best. I've said before when I'm talking about foreign films that if you don't speak the language or if you're not familiar enough with the language, sometimes it can be hard to detect bad acting. I am fairly familiar with the Japanese speech from watching Japanese movies, and so the anime doesn't have quite as much help, but it still does. And the acting in this, it's not super great, but it's definitely not the worst thing I've seen. I'll get to that one eventually. But it's a minor problem, and probably most English-speaking people wouldn't really pick up on it. The premise is so simple that it seems like it's just going to be like, oh, they're just going to show a thing that pops out at you, and that's going to be the whole movie, especially with the length being like 5 minutes. But no, it actually was kind of interesting. The way that it goes was not how I expected, and it's the location that they filmed it in. Again, I think it seems like it's definitely a studio. You can tell those are not real. This is not a real house, but they look really nice. It's sort of a modern Japanese Gothic sort of feel, like, if you understand what I mean by that. Like a Japanese throwback to the Gothic period architecture, I guess is what you might call it. There's a lot of filigree and stuff like that. It definitely doesn't look like a realistic house, and it looks kind of cramped. Honestly, the area that they are in is probably pretty small, and it sort of feels it. With the camera angles and everything, everybody's, the cameras are right up in their face for a lot of it. And that, I mean, it's not a total problem, but it to me, sometimes when the actors crowd the camera too much, it immediately starts to feel like a low budget something. But honestly, it didn't really have too much impact on this one. I felt like the makeup and effects were pretty good, actually. There's one particular effect that's just a very quick effect that I, probably didn't look that great, but it's not really a big deal. The story, though, is probably the biggest, strength that it has, which is not something I anticipated. It's very simple. You can't get across much in 5 minutes, but the story that is there kind of surprised me in what they did with it. I tried to look up more information about the film in any, capacity, but with a title as generic as The Room, and especially, in a post-disaster artist world, I feel like it's very hard to find anything. Even if you put the 2014 or Japanese, I didn't find anything immediately available. But again, I'm totally rushing this one. I apologize, but I'm totally rushing this one today because I got stuff I got to do tonight and tomorrow for my thing tomorrow, so. While this definitely isn't my favorite of the short films, it pleasantly surprised me, kind of greatly surprised me, actually, in the way they wrapped everything up. I would definitely watch something by this group again. I'm not sure exactly, if there were a ton of what appeared to be production companies involved in it, but I wasn't sure. There was a lot of things that had TV in the title or television, so I'm not going to look up all of those people. I don't know who the main group is responsible for it, but there was one name that was attached to everything, and they used it a lot more, which was I almost said Hiroaki, like Hiroaki Samura from Blade of the Immortal. That's not who it is. It's Hiroki with lowercase i's, I think, if I recall correctly. Hiroki. So yeah, I'll probably try to look that person up. I didn't really bother to try to do that now. So yeah, I don't know. There's not really a whole lot more I can say about this one. It's just not anything I tell you about it is going to be a spoiler beyond what I've already said. And it's very simple. Again, much like the Bloody Cuts one that we watched a few days ago. It's pretty much, it's just the more satisfying part of the movie, and that's fine in a certain capacity. When you do that the right way, then that's not a problem. That's what I felt this one was. So you can find this on, as you probably guessed from being filmed at YouTube Space Japan or whatever. You can find this on YouTube for free from the Hiroki page, I think. Yeah, it's just called The Room from Japan. It's a short. So yeah, I would suggest it if you've got 5 minutes and you're curious about it, if you like Japanese stuff. If, the way that it goes, honestly, I think a lot of horror fans would be interested in it, even if you're not specifically a Japanese fan or a short fan or anything like that. But it's really easy to find these short films, and I don't think it's a huge investment, being that it's free and the time is very small. So I do encourage anybody to check out any of the positively reviewed short films that, we go over in this podcast. So anyway, that's my review of The Room from 2014, Japan. So the other movie that I wanted to talk about today is Nightlight from 2015. This one, not a foreign film. It's, as far as I know, it's American. It's definitely in English. So, yeah, I liked this one. I think a lot of people wouldn't enjoy it as much as I did because, having watched as many horror movies as I have, I give a lot of credit to anything that really, tries something different or new in some way. And this one kind of did. It's not the newest, but it is newer. So Nightlight is about a group of teenagers that go out into the woods to play a game, undeterred by the stories told about the place or the news of a recent suicide in the area. The story mostly follows Robin, a girl who's just been invited for the first time to this game by one of the popular boys, despite being less popular and coming from a poorer family than the others. So that's basically it. Obviously, that just turns into a horror movie. They do that. So, as I mentioned, the movie is very ambitious. The most interesting part of the movie is that the camera takes the perspective of Robin's flashlight for the entire length of the film, beginning to end. They never, I tried to pay attention for this, especially as it continued to go on. I don't think there was one moment in the entire movie where they cheated at all, where they ever did a shot that wasn't directly from her flashlight. Sometimes someone else is using her flashlight so you can see it handed over. Sometimes she sets it on the ground so it's in a fixed location, but you see only what the flashlight sees. The only way that they sort of cheat this, you could argue, is that like there are a lot of times when they will set the camera / flashlight down in a way that like nobody would do that. They wouldn't. A lot of times they'll shine it like right at their face, which makes sense in a movie, but is just not something like a real human being would ever do. Not directly at your face anyway. But that's as close as they get, as far as I saw for the whole movie. As a warning, there is a bit of flashing and flickering in this movie, so if you're photosensitive, you might want to watch out for that. I honestly don't think it would create a problem, as those scenes are usually really brief, usually only a couple of seconds and not very close together, but it's still worth mentioning. It's, take your health seriously. And of course, bright, watch it in a bright room if you have any doubt whether that's going to be a problem. I don't need to tell you that. If you're photosensitive, you should know that. So when I went to look up information about the film and the filmmakers, I saw that Nightlight had a shockingly low rating across the board, and I honestly disagree with that. While this movie certainly isn't the best movie I've ever seen, it's far from the worst. I don't know if that rating still stands. That's when I was looking this up when I did the review. But honestly, I do think it's a bit underrated, even considering I understand that I'm going to have more attachment to this because I have been watching. I mean, by this point, I had only seen 32. This was the 32nd review I had done. But regardless, like, that's still a fair number of movies, watching a horror movie every single day. There are a few reasons I can think of that might cause it not to be liked, but nothing to account for how dismally low the rating was. For one thing, it's not as if the idea is totally new. The Blair Witch Project and a lot of other not-so-great movies have tread the get-the-fuck-out-of-the-woods genre pretty heavily, but perhaps I haven't seen enough of those to make me tired of them, as some other people. It also feels vaguely like a creepypasta story, but that didn't really put me off it. The approach they took to the filming, as I said, it's very unique. And although they're clearly doing their best to keep the shakiness down, the nature of, using that flashlight sort of motif, it's directly working against them. Everything obviously is done, I'm assuming, with a hand cam. And that's gonna make for a certain amount of shakiness. Again, they do the very best that they can, trying to limit that shakiness, but there's only so much you can do. There's just so much you can do when you're running around literally with the camera in your hand. That's another thing I should mention. If you're feeling sort of sick or if you get motion sickness, you may want to, again, watch this with bright lights on in the room. I do get motion sickness, and there were a couple of moments where I started to feel just a touch of nausea. But I think, honestly, like, as long as you're not already feeling bad, most people probably wouldn't have a problem. Certainly, anybody who doesn't have motion sickness would probably be fine. They might get irritated. That's different, though. Probably if you're starting to feel your stomach turning, just turn it off for 5 minutes, go, make yourself some popcorn or something and you would be fine. But that's just my personal opinion. I was pretty hooked on the idea when I kept seeing that they continuously kept the camera thing up. Another problem is that so much of the movie takes place while the kids are in full-on panic mode. With emotions that are that high for that long, It might be tiresome to some, I suppose, but they do a few things to try to give the audience a break from it, and I never found myself getting emotionally fatigued in that way. I'm not really saying that the acting is bad. That's not what I'm trying to say. Like, they can't sell the emotions. What I'm saying is, like, if you're watching a movie for a certain amount of time and just it seems like they're just constantly screaming or crying or whatever it is, you just get this, like, fatigue. Or at least I do sometimes. Maybe I'm pretty empathetic, so sometimes I do get, like, empathy pains from watching things. But yeah, I do see how people who are equally empathetic, they might get fatigued, or they might start to get like, okay, I get it, they're scared, on the opposite end of the spectrum. But honestly, it's probably not as much of a problem. The acting in it is pretty fair, considering the high emotions I mentioned before. It must have been just exhausted to be so scared and panicked and panting and running around for hours on end, night after night, during the filming. The actors are young, but have all had a fair amount of work, and they don't feel like rank amateurs for sure. I've seen a lot worse out of people much older, definitely throughout the course of this. But even by the time I had watched this, I had already seen a lot worse. I'm looking at you, Strange Blood. I'm looking at you. The dialogue of the script feels pretty natural to me personally. I think that for most audiences, the plot could have been tweaked a little bit to break up the tension, but that can definitely go awry when you're trying to do that. It might leave spots where it feels like the pacing is wrong or the tone is wrong, or it just breaks with it breaks that tension, obviously, which can be a certainly bad thing. There are a few decisions made by the kids that might seem a bit silly to some, but to me, they're pretty minor when remembering that they're supposed to be panicked teenagers. I would like to remind you that the Blair Witch Project... okay, this is spoilers for Blair Witch, so if you haven't seen it, then just skip ahead, I don't know, like a minute. So in the Blair Witch Project, the fucking camera guy or whatever just throws away the map, and when asked about it, he basically says he threw it away because it wasn't working, which is almost saying he threw it away because they were lost. It's not like it was written on a stone tablet, it's just a piece of paper. There's no reason to throw it out. So my friends and I sometimes, after I explain this to everybody, I always talk about the scene because Blair Witch Project drives me nuts, but specifically this scene. So my friends and I back and forth will say sometimes, he threw it away. I threw it away. Whatever it is, when it's just like, when you were like, fuck it, that's what we say because of that movie. So, I mean, that's how much of an impact that bullshit had on me personally. Anyway. For sure, people make shitty decisions all the time when they're in a bad spot, but there's nothing even approaching that level of irresponsibility or colossal stupidity in Nightlight, so you can relax. I don't really know why I feel such a need to, defend this movie, but I really think that the reviews might not have given it quite a fair shake. They put themselves on the line to try something different, and maybe I appreciate that more highly than other people do, but I still feel like the creators of this movie really deserve a bit of credit for it. It's not an easy thing to make a movie. It's clearly not the highest budget movie. They did a very good job of making an interesting location and giving it an interesting angle. I honestly think that alone should be applauded. This is probably one of the better, get the fuck out of the woods movies that I've seen. I haven't seen a ton of them recently, honestly. I feel like they're becoming, I don't know whether they're becoming less common or if I just find myself avoiding them more frequently these days, but there have been a few in this project, and I think this one was at least the most unique. I don't think the teenagers, I don't find them incredibly irritating, which can be a problem with some movies. I don't know whether that's just me personally or if everybody else finds them completely obnoxious. No idea, couldn't tell you. But I can tell you, they weren't bad for me. Basically, anybody who that premise, the flashlight thing, sounds interesting to, I would definitely suggest it. If you watch, 20 minutes of it, 30 minutes of it, and it doesn't grab you, fine, whatever, you last 20 minutes, you'll be fine. Certainly anyone who enjoys the, creepypasta, get out of the woods sort of vibe, this isn't a bad one to go. Honestly, even, I know that I was just talking shit about Blair Witch, but if you did like Blair Witch Project, this isn't a bad way to go either. I feel like this might appeal to you too. And honestly, to me, a lot more happens in it than in Blair Witch. A lot is packed into the last 10 minutes or so of that movie. And in this movie, I feel like they sort of spread out the horror movie vibe. They do a pretty good job of making certain scenes creepy. Yeah, definitely there are a few things that aren't, like, specifically explained or explained in great detail, but the story, as I recall, at least, didn't really need it. I didn't make any specific notation about that in my review before, so this is just bland, completely going off of memory from 260 some days ago, so I'm not sure whether it's accurate, but I don't remember getting to the end of it and being like, well, that doesn't make any sense, or why didn't they tell us this? Or, oh my God, you didn't explain the most important thing, the most interesting thing about this movie, which I feel like has become more and more common in some of the movies that I've watched. They leave this vague, ambiguous ending on something because they don't have an interesting answer to the questions that they asked in their movie. As I recall, this movie does not do that, so. Anyway, so that's my review of Nightlight from 2015. Like I said, check it out. I honestly think it's interesting. I'm probably going to check out more stuff from the director if they have done more or do stuff in the future. I'd really like to see another interesting angle like that. Not expecting that particular person to do it again because you can only come up with so much, really new ideas. Not every movie can be completely groundbreaking. But I'd be really interested to see anything that this person does beyond this movie. I guess that's my show. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this, please rate, subscribe, review, whatever it is on whatever site you found us. The best way you can help us out, certainly, is to share it with your friends. You can share it on social media, or just, if you have a friend who really likes horror movies or has been looking for a new horror movie that they want to watch, send them my way. And you can always reach out to me on social media. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and probably some others I don't remember. You can also email me at reclusehorror@gmail.com. And if you're trying to find some way to share it with a friend, or if you don't like the platform that you found us on, you can find us on YouTube, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Podcast Addict, and pretty much any podcatcher out there. We're also on Player FM and probably a few other places where you can stream just the audio. But yeah, I think that's pretty much about it. Again, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Have a great night.